Hello YouTube, and I'm supposed to put this in landscape. Hello YouTube, and hello Agent of Doubt. So, Agent of Doubt, I just watched your video on gravity. And you give two different readings of the movie, right? You give a quote-unquote theistic reading and a quote-unquote atheistic reading. I also really enjoyed the film. There were a couple of suspension of disbelief moments for me, but nonetheless, I really thought it was great. But I disagree with your reading. I don't think that it's a story about either she, all this adversity breaks her mind and she turns to irrational options. That doesn't seem to me to be just representative of what happened in the film. And the other reading that you give is that, she found the magic key, which is prayer, right? And no doubt there are a lot of theists who will read it that way, but I don't think that that's the proper reading either. I think that it's much more subtle than either of those. I think that the movie really, if you clear everything away, it is a film about a conversion story. That's what the character undergoes, right? But what kind of conversion story, right? What kind of religion happens there? What kind of religion takes place there, right? And I don't think it's this simple, petitionary prayer recipe. She asks for something and God gives it to her. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think when I watched your video, an atheist take on gravity, I was totally waiting for the sentence, "No atheists in foxholes," to come up, but you didn't say that sentence, which is interesting. But I think that would be the first sentence that would leap to mind. But I think that in this case, we should invert that sentence, and there are two ways to invert it. Right, I once saw like a meme on the internet. Right, no atheists in foxholes is not an argument against atheism. It's an argument against foxholes. Right, it's one, and I always really liked that inversion of that sentence. There's another way that you can invert it, which I think gets at what's going on in gravity a little bit better, which is to say, the proper place of theism is within a foxhole, right? Foxhole, of course, here a metaphor, right? Sandra Bullock's character, Ryan, is in a foxhole, quote-unquote, in the movie. Now, I don't get the idea at any point that she feels confirmed in some way, that she feels like her prayer has been answered. Right. I don't think that's... I think that's simplistic, right? You have this beautiful moment, and I, as an atheist, find it extremely beautiful, the moment where she's like, "I never learned to pray," right? That's kind of the crux of the narrative of the film for me. And the reading of Christianity that I think I've advanced before and I've seen in other places, what I consider to be the proper reading of Christianity, or a way to make theism work, right, is to say that whatever existential conditions I might be going through right now are perhaps too extreme in one way or another. And that causes the human subject to cry out to something transcendent, something beyond the immediate situation in which we find ourselves. And I think that this is sort of the core of the Christian experience, the authentic core of the Christian experience, insofar as Christianity reflects something authentic about the human condition. I think that's where it sort of takes place. There's a reason why Christianity is known as the religion of slaves. There's a reason why Christianity takes as one of its early central figures the martyr, right? Christianity is something that's a response to an extreme circumstance, in a certain sense. Now, you can go further, and for instance, in Gabriel Marcel's work, he starts from the argument that the world is in itself broken, right? So in some sense, living in reality, or Kierkegaard makes this argument as well, he goes through despair as concepts. He deals with despair and angst and all of these things. The world itself is a foxhole, right, for I think the most authentic Christian thinkers. Now, you can argue against that, right? You can say the world is not that bad or something like that, and that's fine. But nonetheless, I think that there's good grounds, or the first few sentences of St. Augustine, the Confessions of St. Augustine, our restless hearts will never find peace until they are with you, or something like that, right? There's something incomplete for Augustine about the human heart that needs to be supplemented. We can never find rest until we affirm something transcendent. This is St. Augustine's point. And I think there's the heart of Christianity is very much tied to this, and I think there is such a thing as a Christianity, or there is such a thing as a theism, that doesn't even necessarily entail an affirmation of the existence of God, right? It's something more like, independent of whether or not God exists, I find myself crying out for something transcendent, something beyond me, right? Something that can hear my cries, right, or my prayers, if you like, which doesn't entail an affirmation of the existence of God necessarily, right? But it's something more like, I think in Sandra Bullock's case in Gravity, it's something more like, I have to believe that someone is listening, right? This is. I have no choice but to affirm that, or I have no choice but to call out, right? Now, you can have a debate about whether or not, or to what degree her prayer was answered, right? I think in some sense the film is ambivalent at that level. You can read the film as saying, as I think you point to, the theists will quote-unquote read, the quote-unquote theists will read the film as being, her prayers were answered. The atheists will view it as being, her remembering something that happened or something like that. But I think the film is ambivalent there. I don't think that there is an answer either or. And I don't think it really matters, right? I don't think it's totally relevant whether or not the prayer was answered. And in some sense, I think that there's an atheistic misreading of what prayer is, and I think that there's a theistic misreading of what prayer is also at work in trying to inscribe this into it. I don't think it's about whether or not the prayer is answered, right? I think it's about the very act of crying out beyond oneself. And I think that this is the interpretive key in terms of unpacking, the difference between these two readings that you're pointing out. I don't think that there is that much of a difference, to tell you the truth, right? The fact of the matter is that the film is agnostic in a certain way, right? The film doesn't postulate that there was anything like an answered prayer. Anything that you could claim was an quote-unquote answered prayer could be thought as being whatever kind of contingency, her remembering things or something like that. And those moments tell my daughter that I love her or something like that. I don't think she's saying that with the sincere expectation that such a thing exists. I think it's just an expression of gratitude for whatever just happened, right? She has no place to put her gratitude, and she's putting it here. So I don't think it's an affirmation or a denial of theism or atheism, right? I think it's, and I think reading it in either way is problematic. What I think is really happening here is that it's a story about a conversion without, and an authentic conversion, right? Very authentic conversion, without necessarily commenting on whether or not that conversion is warranted or grounded in fact, quote unquote, or something like that. Yeah, I think that's the heart of the film. And I don't think that theists and atheists need to read it differently, right? I think that we can all agree on that, right? Now, you might argue that it's a bad thing that she converted in this moment. I don't think I would argue that. I think that what's clear is that it was a necessary thing, right? Like her conversion emerges from conditions in which, like, you can do nothing but pray, right? And I think even as atheists, we can sort of understand that, right? Even if we don't necessarily, like, affirm that that's a good thing or something like that, we can understand the kind of psychology behind that. We can understand what sort of drove her to this moment. It's not a question of her snapping either way. I don't think that what she's doing is necessarily irrational, because I don't think there is a rational thing for her to do. Yeah, so have a good night.